Can peace begin before trust exists? That question sits behind some of the most important international news in the world right now. Wars usually end after trust has been rebuilt. This moment is unfolding in the opposite direction. Trust remains fragile. Accusations remain fresh, and memories of recent attacks are still shaping decisions. Yet, an agreement is moving forward anyway. During his weekly general audience, Pope Leo XIV welcomed news that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America are expected to sign a memorandum of understanding after nearly 4 months of war. He did not describe the agreement as a final victory. He did not suggest that old tensions had suddenly disappeared. Instead, he called it an encouraging result of patient work, dialogue, and negotiation. That choice of words matters. Patient work is not dramatic. Negotiation rarely produces the kind of images that dominate headlines. Yet the Pope's message carried a simple conviction that has shaped Catholic diplomacy for generations. Lasting peace is usually built long before it is visible. The agreement may be signed on paper, but the harder signature has to be written into trust. The Middle East setting behind this agreement is not simple, and that is exactly why Pope Leo's words were careful. The conflict described here involved more than 2 governments' trading statements. The United States and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran, targeting the country's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Iran then answered with counter-strikes against Israel, United States bases, and American allies in the Gulf region. It also disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most sensitive maritime passages in the world. When that narrow waterway becomes unstable, the consequences do not stay local. That is the world into which the expected memorandum of understanding enters. It is not coming after a clean diplomatic disagreement. It is coming after airstrikes, retaliation, military pressure, and regional fear. So when Pope Leo calls for dialogue and cooperation, he is not pretending the violence was minor. He is naming the only path that can keep violence from becoming permanent. Catholic diplomacy often sounds quiet because it does not usually speak in the language of winners and losers. It speaks about trust, security, stability, and the good of peoples. That can sound abstract until missiles are flying, bases are being targeted, shipping routes are being disrupted, and entire regions begin calculating what the next strike might provoke. Then those words become practical. Without trust, agreements become pauses. Without security, peace becomes a slogan. Without stability, ordinary people pay for decisions made far above them. That is why Leo thanked the countries whose names were not at the center of the headline. Pope Leo's first move was to welcome the agreement without exaggerating it. At his weekly general audience, he said he welcomed with satisfaction the agreement between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America, which is expected to be signed on Friday. He called it an encouraging result of patient work of dialogue and negotiation. That sentence matters because it gives credit to the process, not only to the document. The Pope was not treating peace as a sudden breakthrough. He was treating it as something that had to be worked toward patiently, through channels that often remain invisible until an agreement is ready. He also thanked the third-party countries that helped facilitate the peace negotiations. That detail is easy to pass over, but it is one of the most Catholic parts of the whole appeal. Peace is rarely made only by the 2 sides whose names dominate the conflict. Often, it depends on countries willing to carry messages, lower the temperature, protect the space for dialogue, and keep contact alive when direct trust has collapsed. Then Leo named what he hoped the agreement would do. He hoped it would strengthen mutual trust, security, and stability in the Middle East, while promoting paths of dialogue and cooperation among peoples. The order is important. Trust comes first, because without trust, security becomes fragile. Security comes next, because without security, stability cannot hold. And stability matters because ordinary people cannot build a future when every political decision feels like it could become the next military escalation. Then the Pope turned to Ukraine, and the tone became heavier. Leo lamented the growing number of deaths as Russia intensifies its attacks, especially on Ukrainian cities. He named innocent victims. He named rescuers killed while serving others. He named churches and places of cultural heritage devastated by flames. That was not a general statement about war. It was a description of what war consumes: human life, sacred spaces, memory, and the people who run toward danger when others are trying to survive it. He said he was close to those mourning their loved ones, to the wounded, and to those who continue courageously to serve life amid violence. That phrase, serve life, carried the heart of the appeal. It included medics, rescuers, volunteers, clergy, neighbors, and anyone still protecting human dignity where destruction has become routine. The Pope was not speaking about peace as an idea floating above suffering. He was speaking about people still doing the work of life, while violence tries to make that work impossible. Then Leo invited everyone to pray that the war may end. He asked the Lord to open paths of dialogue, to extinguish hatred, and to make a just and lasting peace possible. Not just a pause, not just an exhaustion of weapons. A peace that is just enough to heal wounds truthfully and lasting enough not to collapse the moment pressure returns. The Pope's second appeal made the first one harder to romanticize. A signed agreement can lower the temperature, but it cannot erase what made the war possible. That is the pressure running through Pope Leo's appeal. In the Middle East, the expected agreement between Iran and the United States comes after airstrikes, counterstrikes, disrupted shipping, and nearly 4 months of open conflict. The document may create space for restraint. It may help regional actors step back from escalation. It may give diplomats something real to build on. But mutual trust is not rebuilt by ink alone. That is why the Pope's words were both hopeful and restrained. He welcomed the agreement, but he placed the deeper work in trust, security, stability, dialogue, and cooperation. Each of those words points to something still unfinished. Trust has to survive the next accusation. Security has to mean more than deterrence. Stability has to protect ordinary people, not just calm markets or military planners. Dialogue has to continue when the signing ceremony is over. Ukraine shows why that distinction matters. There, the problem is not the absence of beautiful language. The problem is that cities are still being struck, rescuers are being killed, churches and cultural heritage are being burned, and families are still standing beside fresh losses. Pope Leo's prayer for the Lord to extinguish hatred was not a decorative religious phrase. Hatred is one of the forces that keeps war alive after strategy has already done its damage. The hard truth is that diplomacy and prayer are not competing answers. Diplomacy works on the conditions that make peace possible. Prayer names the wound that politics cannot fully reach. A ceasefire can stop weapons for a time. Negotiations can draw lines on paper. Agreements can create mechanisms. But if hatred remains stronger than the will to recognize another people's dignity, peace stays fragile. That is why Pope Leo placed the Middle East and Ukraine beside each other in the same audience. One conflict showed a possible diplomatic opening. The other showed what happens when violence keeps widening its claim over civilian life. Together, they made the same point from opposite directions. Peace is not only the end of fighting, it is the rebuilding of a world where life can be served without courage becoming a daily requirement. Peace can start with an agreement, but it survives only if something deeper changes. If peace begins before trust is fully rebuilt, then the real test is not the signature. It is the morning after. It is the next provocation. It is the first moment when one side believes the other has violated the spirit of the agreement and has to decide whether to return to dialogue or reach again for force. That is why Pope Leo's 2 appeals belong together. One agreement was moving toward Friday. One war was still tearing through Ukrainian cities. In one place, diplomacy was trying to open a door. In another, flames were consuming churches, cultural memory, rescuers, and innocent lives. The Pope was not offering a simple optimism. He was naming the narrow path that remains when violence has already taught nations to distrust each other. Peace is not proven when leaders sign. Peace is proven when hatred has another chance to speak and people refuse to let it have the final word. If this helped you understand what the Church is actually doing in the world, liking the video helps more people find this kind of Catholic coverage. Subscribe for more Catholic news, Vatican context, and stories from the living history of the Church. And tell me in the comments, what happens if diplomacy produces agreements, but hatred remains stronger than the will to trust? The story continues. And so does the work.